Before we begin, take a second to subscribe and join a community that loves powerful stories of betrayal, shocking secrets, and unforgettable revenge. Now, let's begin. That's the thing I keep coming back to, even now. The envelope was plain white, no window, no urgent red lettering, just our address printed in the small sans serif font that credit card companies use for statements nobody reads anymore. It was sitting under a grocery circular and a dental appointment reminder in the stack of mail I'd left on the kitchen counter for 3 days. On any other Tuesday night, I would have moved it to the weekend pile, made myself another cup of coffee, and gone to bed. Instead, I picked it up, slid my finger under the flap, and pulled out 2 sheets of paper that changed everything I thought I knew about the 9 years I'd spent building a life with my wife. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm 39 years old. I work as a structural engineer at a firm called Caldwell and Associates in Nashville, Tennessee, where I spend my days analyzing load-bearing systems, reviewing blueprints, and finding the exact point where a structure will fail before anyone else can see it coming. I have been doing this work for 14 years, and I am good at it. And on that Tuesday night in February, I sat down at my kitchen table and applied every single skill I had developed over those 14 years to a credit card statement. What I found changed the direction of my entire life. But before I get to that, I need you to understand who Delia was, not who she turned out to be, who she was when I fell in love with her, and who I believe she still was right up until the moment those 2 sheets of paper told me otherwise. Delia Marie Webb, née Fontaine, was 36 years old, a former graphic designer who had stopped working full-time 3 years earlier due to her health, and the woman I had chosen above every other option available to me since the night we met at a mutual friend's housewarming party in East Nashville 11 years ago. She was funny in a dry, understated way that caught you off guard. She remembered things. The name of your 3rd grade teacher, the brand of coffee you preferred, the exact way you liked your eggs. She had a habit of leaving small notes in unexpected places, on the bathroom mirror, inside my laptop case, tucked into my work boots. For years, I had collected them in a shoebox on the top shelf of my closet, because I am not a sentimental man by nature, but those notes made me one. We got married 9 years ago, in a small ceremony outside Murfreesboro. Neither of us wanted anything elaborate. We wanted to be married more than we wanted a wedding, which I think says something true about who we were together in the beginning. 3 years ago, Delia got sick. It started the way these things often start, with symptoms that could have been anything. Fatigue she attributed to poor sleep. Joint pain she blamed on the cold weather. A persistent low-grade fever that her regular doctor treated twice with antibiotics before referring her to a specialist. The specialist referred her to another specialist. That specialist ordered a panel of tests that took 3 weeks to process, and when the results came back, the word they used was autoimmune, and the specific condition they named was one I had to look up 3 times before I could pronounce it correctly. The treatment protocol that actually addressed her condition was not available in Nashville. It was offered at a specialized clinic in Houston, a program that combined infusion therapy, immune suppression management, and dietary intervention in a way that had shown consistent results for her specific diagnosis. Our insurance covered approximately 40% of it. The remaining 60% was a number I stared at on a printed estimate sheet for a long time before I made the phone call to enroll her. I want to be precise about what I did over the 14 months that followed, because precision matters here. I took a second job. On weekends, I did private structural inspections for residential home buyers, the kind of work that takes you into crawl spaces and attics and under bathroom floors, looking for problems that the sellers hope you won't find. I charged $225 per inspection, and did as many as 3 on a Saturday. The money went directly into the medical expense account I had opened specifically for Delia's treatment. I withdrew from my 401k. Not everything. I wasn't reckless, but enough to cover the gap between what the insurance paid and what the clinic required before her second round of treatment. The early withdrawal penalty cost me approximately $4,000 in additional taxes that year. I paid it without discussing it with anyone. I sold my grandfather's truck. This is the part I find hardest to say out loud even now. My grandfather, Harold Webb, had kept a 1987 Ford F-150 in a condition that defied the logic of a vehicle that age. He'd willed it to me when he passed. I had driven it for 6 years and had told myself I would drive it until it literally could not move anymore. A collector in Bowling Green, Kentucky, offered me $12,000 for it after seeing a photo I posted in a classic truck forum, not intending to sell, just sharing something I was proud of. I accepted the offer, signed the title, and watched a man I'd never met load my grandfather's truck onto a trailer and drive it away. I borrowed $11,000 from my mother, Sandra Webb, who worked as a school administrator in Clarksville and had no business lending that kind of money at that stage of her life. She did it without hesitation, and I paid her back in full before I paid a single other debt, because that was the only way I could live with having asked. Delia spent 14 months in the Houston program, flying down every 3 weeks for treatment weeks and managing her protocol from home in between. I drove her to the airport every time. I picked her up every time. I learned how to cook the specific anti-inflammatory diet her treatment team recommended, which meant I spent 3 Sundays a month meal prepping food she could eat and food I could eat quickly between jobs. I tracked her appointments, her lab results, her symptom journals, and her medication schedules in a shared document I updated every week. I did all of this without resentment because I loved her. Because that is what you do when the person you chose is in trouble, and you are the only one who can help. You find a way. By the time Delia was discharged from the program in full remission, I had spent or borrowed just under $90,000, held 2 jobs simultaneously for over a year, and accumulated a level of personal debt that would take me 4 more years to fully retire. She came home on a Thursday afternoon in October. I had taken the day off work. I had cleaned the house, bought flowers she liked, and made the pasta dish she always requested when she wanted something that felt like home. She walked through the front door looking healthier than she had in years, and I held her in the entryway for a long time without saying anything. I believed, standing there in that entryway, that we had survived the hardest thing our marriage would ever ask of us. I was wrong. The hardest thing was what came after. The recovery period was quieter than the treatment had been. Delia rested, attended follow-up appointments, slowly rebuilt her energy. I went back to one job, began working down the debt systematically, and tried to remember what normal felt like. We were careful with each other in the way people are after a long illness, gentle, slightly formal, relearning the rhythms of an ordinary life. What I did not know, and would not know for almost 2 years, was that the man who had coordinated Delia's outpatient care at the Nashville follow-up clinic, a physician's assistant named Garrett Cole, 34 years old, unmarried, with an apartment 12 minutes from our house, had become something to my wife that I had not consented to and had not been told about. The credit card statement told me first. I spread it flat on the kitchen table and read every line. The Riverview Suites in Memphis, Tennessee. Check-in Friday, check-out Sunday. $183 per night. A restaurant called the Peabody Grill. Dinner for 2, $91. A Chevron station outside of Jackson on the return drive, $42 in fuel. Delia had told me she was spending that weekend in Knoxville, visiting a college friend named Patrice. Knoxville is east of Nashville. Memphis is west. They are 300 miles apart in opposite directions. I did not go upstairs. I did not wake Delia. I opened my laptop, pulled up every account I had access to, and started building a picture. 4 hours later, I had a folder on my desktop labeled simply Documentation. Inside it were screenshots, dates, amounts, and a location history pulled from the family sharing feature on our phone plan that Delia had apparently forgotten we both had access to. It was not one weekend. It was not a single mistake. It was 7 separate occasions over 8 months. 3 hotel stays I could confirm with charges. 4 other dates where her stated location and her phone's logged location did not match. A pattern so clear and so consistent that the engineer in me recognized it immediately for what it was, not a crack, a structural failure. The building had already come down. I just hadn't known I was standing in the rubble. I did not confront Delia that night. I want to be clear about that, because people who hear this story sometimes assume that a man who finds what I found would immediately wake his wife, put the evidence in front of her, and demand an explanation. Maybe some men would. I am not that kind of man. I am the kind of man who, when he discovers a structural failure, does not start pulling at the damage section before he understands the full extent of what he is dealing with. Pull the wrong piece too early, and you bring down what is still standing. So I closed my laptop, washed my coffee cup, and went to bed. Delia was asleep on her side, one hand tucked under the pillow the way she always slept. I lay in the dark beside her and stared at the ceiling and thought about the folder on my desktop and the 14 months I had spent keeping her alive and the 12 minutes between our house and Garrett Cole's apartment. And I did not sleep at all. By morning, I had a plan. The first thing I did was call my attorney. Not a divorce attorney, not yet. My general attorney, a man named Philip Draper, who had handled the contract review when I bought into a small property outside of town 3 years earlier. I trusted him to be discreet and direct, which were the two qualities I needed most. I told him I was gathering information about a potential marital situation and asked what I needed to know before I took any formal steps. He told me Tennessee was a fault-based divorce state, which meant documented evidence of adultery could affect the division of assets and any future claims. He told me to document everything and to do nothing that could be considered harassment or illegal surveillance. I asked him specifically about cameras inside a home. He told me that in Tennessee, recording inside your own residence was legal as long as you were an owner or a resident of the property, which I was. I thanked him, made an appointment for the following week, and hung up. That afternoon, while Delia was at a follow-up appointment at the clinic, I drove to an electronics store on the east side of Nashville and purchased 2 small wireless cameras, the kind designed for home security, motion-activated, cloud-backed, indistinguishable from the kind of thing any homeowner might install after reading about neighborhood break-ins. I installed one in the living room, positioned to cover the main sitting area and the entryway from the hall. I installed the second in the kitchen, angled toward the back door, both connected to an app on my phone that I password protected and kept on silent notification. I did not tell Delia about the cameras. I did not need to. What I needed was to know what was happening in my own house. The first notification came 11 days later, on a Wednesday morning. I was at my desk at Caldwell & Associates reviewing load calculations for a parking structure project when my phone vibrated with a motion alert. I opened the app under my desk, one hand still on the keyboard in case anyone walked past my office door, and watched the living room feed. Delia let him in through the front door at 10:17 in the morning. Garrett Cole was tall, casually dressed, the kind of man who looked like he had never worried about anything in his life. He walked into my living room with the ease of someone who had been there before, who knew which way the couch faced and where the light switches were. He set his keys, on the entryway table where I set my keys every evening when I came home from work. They sat together on the couch I had picked out. In the living room of the house I paid the mortgage on, and I watched from my office desk 40 minutes away. I did not leave work. I did not call Delia. I saved the footage to the cloud folder I had created for exactly this purpose and added the date, time, and a brief description to the documentation file. Then I went back to my load calculations because the parking structure needed to be safe and my personal life falling apart was not a reason to do my job poorly. He came back the following Wednesday. Same time, same ease, same casual confidence of a man who believed he was invisible. This time, I watched the kitchen feed as well. Delia made coffee. They sat at my kitchen table, the table where I had spread that credit card statement 2 weeks earlier, and they talked and laughed and existed in my home as though I did not. I saved the footage. I updated the file. I went back to work. By the third Wednesday, I understood that this was not occasional. This was scheduled. Every Wednesday morning, while I was at the office, Garrett Cole came to my house. I had been at work every Wednesday for 9 years. Delia knew my schedule better than I did. She had used that knowledge with a precision that, if I am being honest, I had to reluctantly respect in the purely technical sense. The way you respect an efficient system even when it is being used against you. I started paying attention to other patterns. The weekends were the hotel stays. I now had 4 confirmed instances, and the location history data suggested 2 more I couldn't document with charges because those weekends had been paid in cash, which itself told me something about the level of planning involved. The weekdays were the house visits, and there were the evenings, twice that I could document, when Delia had told me she was running errands or attending a follow-up appointment that ran late, and the location history placed her phone in the vicinity of Garrett Cole's apartment complex on Meridian Avenue. I built the file the way I would build a project report, chronologically, with source documentation attached to every entry, hotel receipts cross-referenced with location data, camera footage organized by date and time, credit card charges mapped against the calendar, It was 41 pages by the time I was done, and every page was clean and factual and completely devastating. Then came the Saturday that removed any remaining doubt I might have been quietly holding on to. Delia told me at breakfast that she was driving to Franklin to spend the afternoon with her cousin Renee. Franklin was 20 miles south of Nashville. Renee was real. She existed. She and Delia were genuinely close, and I had never had any reason to question that particular alibi before. But I had been an engineer long enough to know that the most convincing cover is one built on something true. I waited until Delia's car backed out of the driveway. Then I got in my truck and followed her. Not aggressively, not closely. I stayed 3 or 4 car lengths back on the highway, let a truck merge between us on the interchange, and watched where she went. She did not take the exit for Franklin. She merged onto Interstate 40, heading west toward downtown, and from there onto a surface street that took her into Midtown. She pulled into the parking lot of the Cornerstone Hotel on Division Street at 11:40 in the morning. I parked on the street half a block back and watched. Garrett Cole's silver Acura was already in the lot, backed into a space near the side entrance the way someone parks when they have arrived first and are waiting. Delia walked across the parking lot in the blue coat I had bought her for her birthday 2 years earlier, carrying the overnight bag she kept in the trunk of her car. She had told me she was going to Franklin for the afternoon. I watched her walk through the side entrance of that hotel, and I sat in my truck for a long time afterward. I did not go in. I did not call her. I took photographs of both vehicles with my phone, time-stamped with the hotel sign visible in the frame, and I sent them to the documentation folder along with a note of the date, time, and Delia's stated alibi for the day. Then I drove home, changed clothes, and spent the afternoon doing the yard work I had been putting off for 2 weeks. When Delia came home at 6:30 that evening, she said Renee sent her love. I said that was nice. We had dinner, we watched television. She fell asleep on the couch around 9, and I carried the blanket over and covered her and stood there looking at her face for a moment. I thought about the truck I had sold. I thought about my mother's $11,000. I thought about the Sunday mornings I had spent in a crawl space under a stranger's house so I could afford another round of treatment for the woman sleeping in front of me. I thought about the entryway table where Garrett Cole set his keys on Wednesday mornings, like he owned the place. I thought about the shoebox on the top shelf of my closet, full of her notes. Then I went to my home office, opened my laptop, and called Philip Draper's number. It was a Sunday evening, and he did not answer, so I left a message. "Philip, it's Marcus Webb. I'm ready to move forward. Call me when you can." I hung up, closed the laptop, and went to bed. I slept well for the first time in weeks. Not because I felt good about what was coming, because I had stopped waiting. I had the full picture now. Every piece documented, every date confirmed, every lie mapped against the truth. I had done what I always did when I found a structural failure. I had identified exactly where the damage was, and I had decided what needed to come down. Philip Draper called me back Monday morning at 7:50, while I was still in the driveway, engine running, about to leave for work. I told him I was ready. He told me to come in Wednesday afternoon. I said I would be there, and I drove to the office and spent 8 hours reviewing structural drawings for a warehouse expansion in Clarksville. And I did not think about Delia once. That was not numbness. That was discipline. I had spent 2 months building the case. The case was built. Thinking about it further would not make it stronger. Wednesday morning at 10:13, the motion alert came through on my phone. I was at my desk. I opened the app and watched Garrett Cole walk through my front door for the last time, set his keys on my entryway table for the last time, and settle onto my couch like a man with no reason to be careful. I saved the footage. I closed the app. I drove to Philip Draper's office at 2 o'clock and handed him a USB drive containing 41 pages of documentation, 12 video clips, 19 photographs, and a 3-page written summary organized by date. Philip read through it without speaking for almost 40 minutes. When he finished, he looked up and said, "This is one of the most thorough files I've seen from a client who isn't an attorney." "I'm an engineer," I said. "It shows." He set the drive down. "Tennessee fault divorce. This level of documentation on adultery will affect the asset division significantly. Tell me about the house." I told him. The house on Glenwood Avenue had been purchased in my name alone, 18 months before Delia and I married, with a down payment that came entirely from my savings. When we married, I had added her to the deed as a joint tenant, which was standard and which I had done without a second thought because I trusted her completely. Philip explained that the original purchase history and the source of the down payment were documentable, which meant my premarital equity claim was strong. He also explained that the medical debt, most of which I had taken on personally, would factor into the financial picture in a way that worked in my favor. "What about the debt she doesn't know I know about?" I asked. Philip looked at me. "The credit card account she was using. She ran up charges on a joint account she thought I wasn't monitoring," I said. "Hotels, restaurants, gas, about $3,000 over 8 months. He made a note. "That's dissipation of marital assets. It strengthens your position further." I left his office with a timeline and a list of next steps, and I drove home and made dinner and sat across from Delia at the kitchen table and talked about whether we should replace the water heater before summer. And she said she thought we had another year on it, and I said probably, and we did the dishes together and went to bed. I waited 4 more days. I wanted to be precise about the timing. I wanted the divorce filing to be already initiated before the conversation happened, so that nothing Delia said or did in that room could affect what was already in motion. Philip filed on a Friday morning. By 2 in the afternoon, I had confirmation that the papers had been submitted to the court. I came home from work that evening at my normal time. Delia was in the kitchen. I set my bag down, poured 2 glasses of water, carried them to the dining room table, and said, "Can you come sit down for a minute?" She came in drying her hands on a dish towel, not alarmed, not hurrying, just the ordinary motion of a woman who expected an ordinary conversation. She sat across from me and looked at me with the open expression she had always had, and for one last moment I saw the woman I had driven to Houston airports 14 times and cooked anti-inflammatory meals for on Sunday afternoons, and held in the entryway when she came home healthy. Then I opened the folder I had carried in under my arm and laid it flat on the table between us. "I need you to look at this," I said. "All of it. Take as long as you need." Delia looked at the first page, the credit card statement, the Memphis hotel charges, and I watched the color leave her face slowly, the way water drains from a basin, steadily and without drama. She turned to the second page, the location history data, dates and coordinates listed in columns. The third page, photographs of both cars in the Cornerstone Hotel parking lot, time-stamped, hotel sign visible. She stopped there for a moment with her hand flat on the photograph, not speaking. I let her keep going. She went through the documentation slowly, every page, and I watched her and did not say anything until she reached the printed still frames from the camera footage. Garrett Cole walking through our front door, setting his keys on the entryway table, sitting on our couch. At those, her hand stopped moving and she sat very still. When she reached the last page, she closed the folder and looked at the table. I said, "I need you to understand something before you say anything." She looked up at me. "I held 2 jobs for 14 months, I said. "I drove you to the airport 26 times. I sold my grandfather's truck. I borrowed money from my mother that she could not afford to give. I spent $90,000 that I'm still paying back to keep you alive." I kept my voice level. "And every Wednesday morning while I was at work doing all of that, you let him into our house. You put him on the couch I picked out, in the kitchen where I meal prepped your treatment diet on Sundays, at the table where I tracked your lab results." Delia's eyes filled, but she did not speak. "I'm not asking you to explain it," I said. "I've spent 2 months figuring out the explanation on my own. I'm telling you so that you know exactly what I know. All of it." She finally spoke. Her voice was thin. "Marcus, the divorce was filed this morning," I said. "Philip Draper's number is on the last page of the folder. You'll want to get your own attorney." The first thing she did was cry. Not quietly, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and sudden, the kind I had watched her do 3 years ago when the specialist first said the word autoimmune, and she had sat in that clinic chair and understood the size of what was in front of her. Part of me registered that the same sound could mean entirely different things at different moments in a life. The second thing she did was reach for my hand across the table. I moved it back. "I made a mistake," she said. "Marcus, I made a terrible mistake." "No," I said. "A mistake is a one-time event. What you made was a decision, and then you made it again and again, 7 times over 8 months while I was paying for the life that made it possible." She shook her head. "I was lonely. When I was recovering, you were always working. He was the one who was there." "I was working," I said, "because I had $90,000 in medical debt and a second mortgage I took out to cover your 3rd treatment round. I was working because I had to." I stood up from the table. He was available because he wasn't carrying any of that. Delia covered her face. I know that. I'm sorry. I believe you, I said, and I meant it. But sorry doesn't restructure the foundation. It just tells me the building was already compromised. I picked up my glass, carried it to the kitchen, and went upstairs to the bedroom we had shared for 9 years. I took the shoebox from the top shelf of my closet, the one with her notes, all those small pieces of paper she had left in unexpected places for the first several years of our marriage. I carried it downstairs, set it on the table in front of her, and went back up. I slept in the guest room the night. Delia called her mother, which I had expected. Her mother called me the following morning, which I had also expected, and said the things that people say when they want to protect their daughter from the consequences of her choices. That I had been emotionally unavailable, that the distance created during her illness had been hard for everyone, that Delia was genuinely remorseful, and that a long marriage deserved a genuine attempt at repair before either of us made permanent decisions. I listened completely. Then I said, "She let another man into our home on the days I was at work paying her medical bills. There is no repair framework for that." And I ended the call politely. The legal process took 6 months. Delia hired an attorney named Christine Park, who was competent and professional and hit the same wall every time. The documentation, the premarital equity in the house, the medical debt in my name, the dissipation claim on the joint account. Christine Park filed 2 motions that Philip Draper answered the same week with the same USB drive full of evidence. By month 4, Delia's legal position had narrowed to the point where Christine Park sat down with her client and told her the honest version of what was available. The settlement gave Delia her car, her personal belongings, her individual bank account, and 6 months of transitional support. The house remained mine. The retirement accounts, funded almost entirely from my earnings, remained mine. The medical debt, documented as personally assumed, was factored as an offset against any community property claim. She moved into an apartment in East Nashville. Garrett Cole helped her move, which I knew because one of our neighbors mentioned it, without realizing what they were telling me. I thanked the neighbor and went inside. 3 months after the settlement, I accepted a transfer to my firm's Denver office. Senior project lead, better pay, a city where no street corner had a memory attached to it. I gave notice on the Glenwood Avenue house, arranged a tenant, and packed what I needed into a moving truck on a Saturday morning in November. Before I left, I walked through the house one last time. The living room where the camera had recorded everything, the kitchen table where I had laid the folder, the entryway where another man had set his keys. I left the shoebox in the kitchen, not as a statement, just because I was not going to carry it. I drove to Denver in 2 days, stopping in St. Louis overnight. When I crossed into Colorado and the Rockies came into view on the western horizon, something released in my chest that I had not realized I had been holding. Delia and Garrett Cole lasted 8 months after the divorce. I know this because Philip Draper mentioned it during a call about a minor paperwork item, not as gossip, just as information that had come his way. I did not ask for details. I did not feel satisfaction or vindication. I felt nothing about it, which itself told me something about how completely I had already closed that chapter. Denver was good. The work was harder and more interesting than anything I had done in Nashville. I was leading a team on a mixed-use development downtown by month 6, the kind of project that requires you to be fully present every day, which suited me exactly. I found a gym near the office, a coffee shop where nobody knew me, a hiking trail that took me above the tree line on clear weekends. I started sleeping well. Not immediately, but steadily, the way a structure settles when it is built on solid ground. Delia messaged me once, 14 months after the settlement. It was a short message, the kind people write after they have rewritten it many times. She said she hoped I was well. She said she thought about the entryway table sometimes, by which I understood she meant the morning I had described to her, the detail that had landed hardest. She said she was sorry in the specific way that people are sorry when they have had enough time and enough distance to see something clearly. I read it twice. Then I closed my phone and went back to the blueprint on my desk. I did not respond, not out of cruelty, because there was nothing left to say that the folder had not already said, more precisely and more honestly than either of us ever could. Some structures cannot be repaired. You do not patch a failed foundation with apologies and good intentions, and the hope that everyone agrees to forget the original failure. You document the damage, you understand the cause, and then you build somewhere else on ground that has not already been compromised. That is what I did. It is what I am still doing. The building did not have to come down, but once it did, I was not going to stand in the rubble waiting for someone to hand me back what I had already lost. I am an engineer. I build things. So, I built something new.